All right, good morning.
We're back.
We're back. That's right, in person, the catch-up edition of the Kahal Yereim Daf Yomi. We are on the bottom of Nun Daled Amud Aleph. We'll get some ground covered over the next today. We're going to start with Amar Lehu Rav Nachman. We're on the wide line, the first wide line on the bottom. Amar Lehu Rav Nachman. We had just stated that although somebody cannot prohibit the animal of another person by worshiping it, right? We said that if you do some sort of action to it, right, then that actually overrides it. You can make somebody's animal prohibited if you worship it and do some sort of action to it. So Amar Lehu Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman says, Poku v'amru le'ula, that go out and say to Ula, Kvar tirgama Rav Huna lishma tech bevavel. That Rav Huna already taught this teaching over in Babylonia. Dama Rav Huna said, Haisa behemis chaver revutza bifnei avodas kochavim. So if there was an animal that was crouching in front of idol worship being offered, right? Kevan cheshachat ba siman echad, when a person comes over and he slaughters it. Now an animal has a windpipe and a food pipe, right? That's the non-scientific terms for the trachea and the esophagus. If you slaughter one, in order to do shechita on an animal, you need to sever the majority of both of those. If you slaughter one, which is not even a valid kosher slaughtering, but it's the beginning of a kosher slaughtering, that's considered a significant action to the animal. And if you do that, asra, the animal becomes prohibited, despite the fact that it's not your animal. So the question is, minolon de asra. What is the source for this idea that the animal becomes prohibited just by doing an extra action to it? So ilema me kohanim. So maybe let's take a look at the kohanim from we had the Chanyo's Beis Hamikdash that he had in Alexandria. So we said those kohanim couldn't serve in the Beis Hamikdash that we have. So maybe once they've done an action of Avodah Zara, or not even necessarily Avodah Zara, but an action not in the temple, so therefore they can't serve in the Beis Hamikdash. So maybe this is where that source is.
So there were two Beis Hamikdashes?
They had the regular Beis Hamikdash, and then Chanyo made his model Beis Hamikdash in Alexandria, right? Argument whether he was worshiping Avodah Zara there or whether it was Shem Shemayim.
Did he get sin for making another Beis Hamikdash?
Yes, he did. Right, was not to be, but I was going to say, I suppose it's better than a coup or something like that, but yes, worse than following the halacha.
Was it like a replica?
That's what it sounds like, yeah. He just, in fact, so much so that they said that you can interchangeably grab the utensils from the Alexandria Beis Hamikdash and bring them to this Beis Hamikdash and use them, right? He was well-versed in the service as the Kohen Gadol, as his father was. He was supposed to take over, and he decided, I regret giving it to my brother, and I'll take over. And then he established a whole new Beis Hamikdash.
He's been a man of means to be able to do something like that.
Yeah. Well, the Kohanim, especially the Kohanim Gedolim, were very wealthy, right? That is one of the things that the Kohanim Gedolim were supposed to be. And if they appointed a Kohen Gadol who was not wealthy, then the other Kohanim gave him money to be able to make him wealthy. It was important that the Kohen Gadol be Gadol me echov, which means that he has to be of stature, he has to be a tzaddik ideally, although we see that they were not, and wealthy individuals. Baruch atah Adonai b'shachol v'virah.
Amen.
So ilema me kohanim, maybe you're going to say it's from the kohanim. V'dilma shani kohanim, maybe the kohanim are different. You can't learn kohanim to an animal. Dibnei deyaninhu, because kohanim are human beings. They make their own choices. And therefore, they are prohibited, but that's not going to be the same thing by an animal. The elami avnei mizbeach. Rather, let's say it's from the stones of the mizbeach. We know that the Greeks they defamed profaned the Beis Hamikdash, and they had to put away the stones of the Beis Hamikdash, right? Because they were used in service of Avodah Zara, and we had to get rid of them. But since an action was performed to them, but that maybe doesn't prove it, because Dilma Kid Rav Papa, maybe the answer to that is like Rav Papa said. Because Rav Papa had told us, if we recall from last week, that since they were non-Jews, once they entered into the Beis Hamikdash, they profaned everything, and then everything became hefker. At which point, when they started to seize control of it and use it, they were using their own, and that's why it became prohibited. It's not the same thing as using a Jewish person's animal and doing an action to it where the animal actually belongs to somebody else. The Ella Mikalim. So rather, we're going to learn it from the utensils of the Beis Hamikdash. We had the story that Achaz, the king of Yehuda, used the utensils of the Beis Hamikdash for Avodah Zara. And then Chizkiyahu wanted to reuse them, but instead of reusing them, they melted them down and they made new ones. So why is that? Right? They said what we did is we took all of the utensils, and the literal translation is we prepared them and we consecrated them. And we explained that, if you remember, they first wanted to suggest that meant that they prepared them and they brought them to the mikvah and they re-sanctified them, but they decided in the end it meant the opposite. Amar hakenu shegonzum, that we put them shegonzanum, that we put them into chayrim, we put them away. Vehikdishanu shekdishanu achirim tachteim, we brought new utensils. So therefore, these utensils, since they were used for Avodah Zara by a Jew, and they were not his, nevertheless, we're not allowed to use that. So we ask the question, how could we have to get rid of these utensils? They were not achazes to make use of, and he can't prohibit something that belonged to somebody else. Ella, so rather, came into avabehu maisa, since an action of significance was done to them, itzeru lahu, they became prohibited. And that is the same thing as what we're dealing with this animal. Hachanami, so too here with the animal. Kevan she'asa b'maisa asra. Once an action is done to the animal of slaughtering, so that is significant, and even if it belongs to somebody else, it still becomes prohibited. And right, it would be whether the person is responsible for a financial compensation. I suppose it's not for the conversation here necessarily, but we do have a concept that when somebody causes a financial loss through spiritual means, there isn't a financial compensation. For example, if somebody steals chametz and then he returns it after Pesach, now the chametz has to be destroyed. No fine. He has returned the item, despite the fact that it has no value now because it's chametz shavar of Pesach.
Even though chametz was stolen on Pesach, right?
Before Pesach and then returned after Pesach, so now we can't use it.
Even though
it's considered returned.
It was stolen.
Yeah.
Well, the goy bought it, so...
Well, we're not talking about whether goy buys. I said if the Jew stole it beforehand and then returns it afterwards, so it was owned by a Jew during Pesach, and it has to be destroyed. Nevertheless, the person who stole it is considered as though he has returned the item. Now, you may be responsible for paying from a heavenly level, right? From a Mina Shemayim perspective, but it would be difficult to be able to get that payment from a basin because you actually, here's the animal. Now, it was a living animal, and now it's not a live animal. Maybe there is a payment there.
Burn it because it was in the Jewish.
Yes, still has to be burned. That's correct. So I said beyond our discussion necessarily here, but just to point out that, yeah, in this circumstance, it's not as though somebody came along and he killed it, so he did do some damage to it. That physical damage he may be responsible for. But whether the carcass still belongs, even though the carcass is now Asr B'Hana, I'm not 100% sure. Okay, Ki Asr Rav Dimi, Amr Rav Yochanan. Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael. He said the name of Rav Yochanan, Afal Pisha Amru, HaMishtacha V'Lekarka Olam Lo Asra, even though we have a long-standing principle that we have established, that if somebody bows down to the ground, to the earth, mountains and those sorts, you can't prohibit those. If you dig into the ground, pits, channels, caves, asra. That is prohibited. Those items are considered structures, and they are prohibited. The ground becomes prepared. They have to be destroyed. And why? Because, again, same idea. Even though we've said that you can't simply make some things that don't belong to you prohibited, if you do an action, a significant action, that is the overriding characteristic. He also, Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda, Rav Yochanan, when Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda came from Eretz Yisrael, he said in Rav Yochanan, Alpha Pisha Amru, even though we have a rule that if somebody bows down to a living item, an animal of sorts, you are not going to be able to prohibit it. Same reason. If that animal is used in exchange for an idol. So if one Jew has an idol and another Jew has an animal, and they trade, despite the fact that the idol has no intrinsic value, nevertheless, that is considered a transference and the animal becomes prohibited. Ki also Rabin, and therefore the same idea, some kind of more significant act than simply somebody bowing down to somebody else's animal. Ki also Rabin, when Rabin came from Israel, Omar, he said, Pligu ba Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Yossi v'Rabbanan. There was an argument between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Yossi and the Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Yossi and the Rabbanan. Chad Amar Chalipin Asurin. One said that animal was prohibited. Chalipin Mutarin. But now that you have exchanged the animal for an idol, the animal is clearly prohibited. What if you then take that animal and exchange it again for something else? is that secondary item prohibited or not? That was an argument. One says the secondary item is permitted, and the other one says if you keep exchanging, and it becomes prohibited. My time demand what is the rationale behind the opinion that says that which is exchanged and then further exchanged is prohibited? Amar Krab, because the pasuk says that an item that is exchanged for avodah zara becomes prohibited just like the original item. Kol shata miyem mimenu harehu kamohu. Right? Anything that comes from the item is like the idol itself. So therefore, if you exchange an animal for an idol, this tells us that the animal becomes prohibited like the idol. And so therefore, now, if it's like the idol, just like if the idol was exchanged, it would prohibit. So too now, this animal, which becomes like the idol, if it further becomes exchanged, it also prohibits the item like the original idol. So therefore, everything becomes prohibited. I would presume that the animal retains its status of prohibition, but I'm not entirely sure, as we'll see in the Gemara. Right? That would make all the items continuously prohibited. V'idach, the other one says, Amar Kro, the pasuk says, who? No, it will be prohibited, which means who, that only the exchanged item will become prohibited like the idol, v'lo chalipe chalipin, but not if you continue to further exchange it. It's a limiting word to say that only the first item that gets exchanged becomes prohibited like the idol, but further items that get exchanged are not. Okay, so now, v'idach, what does the other one do with that extra word who? That comes to exclude that this is not the case when it comes to orla produce. First 3 years, produce grows in the first 3 years is prohibited from getting benefit. Kilaya kerem is if you grow grain and grapes in the same field. Those items, that is also prohibited. Even though those are prohibited, if you make an exchange, which is prohibited to do, you can't get any benefit from them. But if you did, the things that you exchange it for is not prohibited. Why? Because this pasuk says this rule of an exchange becoming prohibited only applies to avodah zara. It does not apply to other items that are forbidden from benefit. So if I have other circumstances, orla, kilaya, kerem, that is not going to create the prohibition for benefit. She'im mochran v'kidesh bid mehen, which is that if you sell them and then you make an exchange for money, and now you take the money that you sold your kilayim with and you decide to marry a woman with it, you would say, well, wait a second, I can't get any benefit from that money because that money is prohibited just like the original kilayim is. Not so. Mikudesha, she is married. That money is not prohibited from getting benefit out of, and therefore you're married. Even though it's prohibited to get benefit, you have gotten benefit, and now you are married. Ve'idach, now the other opinion says, Orla v'kilaya kerem lo tzrichi miyuta. We don't need a pasuk according to the other version. That who is extra. Why? Because we don't need a pasuk. Why? Because I already know that Orla, and I already know that kilayim are already excluded. We have a rule that shnei ksuvin habayin ke'echad, it's in the Yud Gimel Ikarim that we read every morning by Rabbi Gamliel Omer, right? Rabbi Gamliel Omer, that two shnei ksuvim habayin ke'echad, if I have two psukim that say the same thing, then that means they are the exceptions, not the rule. Why? Because we have a concept of what's called a binyan av. If a Torah says something one time, then the Torah is telling me this is the rule for this circumstance and all circumstances that are similar to it. Why would the Torah then have to write it a second time? Because I already know, if I already wrote it once, I don't need to write it a second time. I already presume that that's the law for the second time and the third time, etc. The reason then has to be is, if it's written one time and then written a second time, it means that it's only those two cases that this applies to. And so therefore it applies to these two and no other circumstances. And we have two circumstances where an exchange makes the new item prohibited, and that is avodah zara and Shemitah produce. Shemitah produce, again, can't get any benefit from the Shemitah produce that becomes prohibited, that you illegally grew. So that also, if you make an exchange for the Shemitah produce, well, it's not necessarily prohibited for us getting any benefit from it. I can eat it, but I have to treat it as Shemitah. When I exchange that item for another Shemitah item, that item, let's say I have some money that I exchange for a Shemitah item, that money has Kedushas Shvius. And how do we know that? We know that if you have two psukim that say the same law, we cannot teach it to any additional places. We already know the pasuk when it comes to avodah zara. We already said it. Shvius, the pasuk that is about Shemitah, Dichsiv, the pasuk says, Ki yovel hi kodesh tiyeh lachem. It is a yovel, right, the 50th year, and it will be kodesh to you. Ma kodesh tofes es damav, the aser, Just like if you make something, what do you mean Shemitah's Kodesh? So it's just like Kedushin, like in Beis HaMikdash. Just like if I declare something to be hektish, so then the money becomes hektish and prohibited for you to get benefit. Af Shvius, so too, if I exchange something for Shemitah produce, Tofeses es Domeha, the money becomes Shemitah, V'asura becomes prohibited to you. Yeah, but ima kodesh tofes dama v'yotze lechulin, av shvius tofes dama v'yotze lechulin. What should be then the halacha? Just like hektish. If I take an item and I say this is hektish, and then I say, well, I'm buying it out of hektish. My mug is hektish. So then I'm going to take $5 and I'm going to buy my mug out of hektish. The $5 becomes hektish. The mug is no longer hektish. So let's say that's the same thing with Shemitah. I take some produce and I say this $5 is in exchange for this dozen apples. So now the apples are not Shemitah anymore and the money is not true. Because Talmud Lomer, the pasuk says, tiyeh, that this should be Shemitah, meaning behaviyasat tehei, the Shemitah remains Shemitah. So ha'ketzad, how does this work then? The Shemitah remains Shemitah, but the money that's exchanged also becomes Shemitah? It works like this. Lakach beperos shvius basar. Let's say you take some produce, you have some wheat that was grown during Shemitah year, and you purchase with it some meat. Elu ve'elu misba'arin bashvius. Both of them have to be destroyed at the time when you have to remove that produce from when that produce is no longer available in the field. Then this meat also must be consumed or destroyed by that date. Lakach bebasar dagim, if you took this meat and you exchanged it for fish now, yatsa basar v'nichnesu dagim, the meat is no longer Shemitah, and the fish is now Shemitah. Bedagim yayin, you now exchange that fish for some wine. Then yatsu dagim, the fish is no longer Shemitah, nichnas yayin, the wine is. But yayin shemen, you take that wine, you exchange for oil. You get the message here. Yatsu yayin, the wine is no longer Shemitah. V'nichnas shemen, and the oil is. So ha'ketzad. So how does it come out that it works? Acharon nitves b'shvius. The last item that you purchase becomes Shemitah. Upri atzmo aser. But the first wheat that was originally really Shemitah still stays Shemitah. So that wheat is Shemitah plus whatever the last thing you exchanged is.
How do you make oil to Shemitah? How does that work?
It grows during Shemitah year. That's how it becomes Shemitah. Oil. So oil, well, the answer is oil could be olives that grow during the Shemitah year. But in this circumstance, we're purchasing oil that was not Shemitah, right? Let's say you purchased oil that came from last year's produce.
Olive oil, right?
Yes, but you still have to purchase it from previous years, right? Because vegetable oil, olive oil can still grow during Shemitah and be a problem. Right? So you would have this oil that grew from a previous year, and now I make it into Shemitah. That's the last item, but then if I take that oil and I exchange it for something else, then that something else becomes Shemitah and not the oil, right? So that's how we say. Ve'idach kasavar. Now, that means that one opinion says, great, I've got my Avodah Zara, I've got my Shemitah. These are two halachos, and now that means that this idea of exchanging the prohibition to another item doesn't apply to any other circumstances. So I don't need that word who for anything else. Therefore, the word who means to imply that only the item itself becomes prohibited when exchanged for Avodah Zara and not a secondary item. Ve'idach kasaver, the other one says, Shnei ksuvim haban kechem melamdin. He says, no, that rule is not true. That actually, even if something is written twice in the Torah, that could still teach you that that is the circumstance in other cases as well. Ve'itzrechu lima'otinhu, and therefore I need the word who in order to tell me, no, other things are not included in this prohibition. Only Avodah Zara, only Shemitah, other items are not included, and therefore an exchange of an exchange, according to that opinion, is still prohibited. Okay, next Mishnah. Shalu says a Canaan Baromi. So the non-Jews asked the Jewish elders in Rome, in Romi. I'm not sure if Romi is the same thing as Rome, as we said before, that Romi may not be the...
Ask the elders, the Jewish sages in Rome, instead of the Archbook translation.
So either the Jew, but we did say before that Roma is probably Roman. Romi could be a Israeli city named after it, but I don't know. So said sometime we had mentioned that before. If Hashem doesn't like Avodah Zarah so much, why doesn't He just get rid of it? Right? Why does Hashem rules the world? Just destroy all the Avodah Zarah. Amru lahen, so they said back to them, if all the Avodah Zarah was things that were not necessary in the world, so then hayam evatlo, you're right, then Hashem would destroy it. But you see, people worship the sun, the moon, the stars, the planets. Hashem's going to destroy because these foolish people were worshiping Avodah Zarah. Hashem's going to destroy the world, destroy the sun, right? The moon, you can't do that. So Amru lahen, so they said back, Im ken yova davar shein tzarich li'olam. Look, people have little idols, they have statues. Hashem should destroy those. He doesn't have to destroy the sun, the moon, the stars, at least destroy those. Right, should destroy the things that shein tzarech liolam bo, v'yaniach davar shetzorech olam bo, and then leave the things that Hashem needs. Amru lahen, so they said back to them, Af anu machzikin yedei ovdehen shel elu sheomrim Teid'u shehein Elohus shaharei hein lo batlu. Then that would strengthen the faith of the people who are worshiping those little idols, because they would say, or the ones that are worshiping the sun, because they would say, look, Hashem destroyed this idol, but that one Hashem didn't destroy. It must mean that one is more powerful than Hashem.
Yeah, it's like in context of the Talmud, Romi refers to Rome, the city that was the capital of Roman Empire. The Talmud, both Jerusalem Talmud and the Babylonian Talmud, frequently discuss Rome and its relationship with Jewish people.
There you go. Okay, so Romi is Rome. Says the Gemara, Tan Rabbanan, Shalu philosophin es hazikenim, those philosophers, they asked the elders Beromi. Same thing, this Bryce is going to quote the basic back and forth, but a little bit of a different conversation. Im Elohechem ein ritzono b'avodas kochavim. If your God does not like Avodah Zara, mipnei ma eno mivatlo, why doesn't he just destroy it? Amru lahem, he said to them, ila davar shein ha'olam tzorech lo hayu ovdin. If they would worship something that the world does not need, harei hu mivatlo, then Hashem would destroy it. Harei hein ovdim lechamu levano lekochavim u'mazolos. But they worship the sun, the moon, the stars, and the planets. Yovid olam mipnei hashotim. Hashem's going to destroy the world because of the foolish people. Ella olam kimin hago noheg. The world's just going to work the way the world naturally works. Hasham's going to take care of those foolish people that worship them later on. Davar acher, another explanation. Let's say somebody steals a measure of wheat. And he goes and he plants that which he stole. Dinhu, it's justice, that it shouldn't grow. Right? Why should somebody benefit from crime? So Ella olam kiminha go nohe, but you see that's not how Hashem runs the world. Hashem lets the world run, the holech and go, the shotim shekil kulasin litinas hadin, and then he takes care of the people who violate the halachos later on. Davar acher, another thing. Harei sheba leishes chaveru. If somebody has relations with his friend's wife, din hu shalot tisaver, she shouldn't be able to get pregnant from such relations because it's an avera. El olam kimin hago noheg. Hashem says the world should run the way it's supposed to work. The holech and go. The shotim shekil kulasin litinas hadin, and then eventually the people who will do the averos are going to have to pay for it. V'hainu damar Reish Lakish. That's what Reish Lakish says. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem says, Lo da young l'Rishayim she'osin sela shali pumbi. Not only is it bad that the people people who do averos, they make my money into a prohibited item. Pumbi is right. So into he makes it. They make my money into something which is pumbi, which is hefker. Right? They take my money and they just use, basically they take my laws and they abandon them. Rather, they make me use my signet ring and form the shape, because Hashem has to form human beings, right? So they force me to step in and get involved. So Hashem says, not only do I don't like it, but I got to get involved and help child become alive and born, and I have to help out the Avera in such a way. Shal philosophus echad is Rabbi Gamliel. A philosopher once asked Rabbi Gamliel, Kasu b'sorach schem, it says in your Torah, Ki Hashem Elokecha eish ochla. Hashem is a fire that consumes. Who? El kana, he's jealous. So, mipnei ma miskane ba'ovdeha, ve'in miskane ba. Why does Hashem take punishment against the people who serve the Avodah Zara, but not the Avodah Zara itself? Why is he jealous of the Avodah Zara? Amrulo, so we said to him, I'll tell you what this is like. Imagine a human king, he has one son. And that son, he was raising a dog. And he named the dog his father's name. And when he would swear, he would say, I swear in the name of my dog and his father's name. When the king hears about this, who's he angry at? Who's he angry at the dog, or is he angry at his son?
I'm saying son. He shouldn't have called it son.
That's correct. So it makes sense he's going to be angry at his son. So therefore, that's why Hashem is angry at the people who worship the idols, not the idols. Amar lo Kelev, he said, the Kelev atakoreosa v'halo yesh ba mamish. He says, well, wait a second. You're calling my Avodah Zara a dog? I get your parable, right? The Avodah Zara is the dog. Well, the Avodah Zara has real powers, says this philosopher to Rabbi Gamliel. How can you compare it to a dog? Amar lo, so he says, Mari Isa. So he says, How do you know they have powers? Where do you know Avodah Zarah's powers? Amar lo, so he said to him, Pamachas nafla deleka b'yireinu. One time the whole city caught fire. V'nisrafa kol yirkula, and the whole city burned down. The oso base avodos kochavim lo nisraf, and that church of the holy Avodah Zarah did not burn down. Amar lo, so he said to him, if you want to Gemara, go ahead. Yeah, come on, join in. Oh, okay, well, did we have some English?
Yeah, there's English.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Lama davar doma. So what is this similar to? Lamelech basar v'dam, like a human king. Shesarcha love Medina. So that the whole there's a whole country that is rebelling against him. Osa milchamim achayim hu osa u'mamesim hu osa. Who does the king attack? The living people or the cemetery? So Hashem attacks the living people, not the cemetery. Havi Omer. Amachayim hu osa, imachayim hu osa. He makes war with the living people. So therefore, when the fire burned the city, he attacks the living people. He doesn't bother to attack the church. Mm-hmm. So Amarle, this philosopher is now getting a little insulted by Rabbi Gamliel. Kelvata koreosa, meisata koreosa. You call my avodah zarah, you call my idolatry, you call it a dog, you're calling it a dead thing. So imkain yovdena mina olam. So if that's true, if it's so base, and why doesn't Hashem just destroy all the idols from the world? Samar lo. So he said, Ilu ledavar she'ena olam tzarich lo hayu ovdim harehu mevatlo. Now he quotes our Mishnah, right? If it wasn't for the fact that people who worship idols weren't worshiping things that the world needed, Hashem could destroy all of the idols from the world. But the idols that they're worshiping are the sun, the moon, the stars, the planets. Lafikim legeos. They worship the streams and they worship the valleys. So Yovad Olama, what, God's supposed to destroy the whole world? Mipnei Shotim, because of the foolish people that worship them as idols. V'cheinu Omer, as the pasuk says, the verse says, Asof Asef Kol Me'al Pnei Adama Num Hashem. Hashem will destroy. Should Hashem destroy all of these idols from the face of the world? Adam Asaf Adam Ubehema. He's going to destroy all humans that are worshipped and all animals that are worshipped. Asaf Ofa Shemaim. He's going to destroy all the birds. V'dagi Yam, or fish. And anything else that trips up the wicked people. Hashem can't just start destroying random objects just because somebody goes along and decides that they're gods. Just because the wicked people, they are falling prey to it. We're on 55a, right? Just because that we're falling prey to them, the wicked people are falling prey to worshiping these idols. Yovdei min olam, they get destroyed from the world. They worship human beings. Which means that God has now got to destroy all the human beings from the world. It's impossible. Okay, Shal Agrippus Sartzava es Rabbi Gamliel. So Agrippus, who was the general, I think of the governor Agrippa, who was in charge, who was the grandson of Herod. So we're talking about mid-Second Temple era. So this general, he asks Rabbi Gamliel, obviously, he did not consider himself a Jew, right? So he says, it's written in your Torah, God is a consuming fire, and he is a jealous God. Look, nobody gets jealous of anything that is not competition, right? So therefore, why is God a smart person gets jealous of another smart person? A strong person gets jealous of another strong person. Ashir ba'ashir. A rich person gets jealous of another rich person. Why would God be angry at idols? Doesn't that prove that they have some kind of power, just like God? Because otherwise, why would God be jealous of them?
No, God's not jealous of the idols. He's mad that we're worshiping idol which has no power.
So hang on, wait for his answer. You're ahead of us. So Amar Lo, so he said to him, I'll tell you a parable of what this is like. So it's imagine a person who marries a second wife, right? If the second wife is more what do you call it? Refined and important person. So then the first wife realizes their household is moving up in the world, right? You see that I married my husband when he was a low person, and now he is elevated, and that's good for us. See what we've done. So Ein Miskan Abba, she's not jealous of her. Pechusa Mimena, but if he marries the lesser lady, right? He decides that he's going to marry his 18-year-old secretary. So then miskana, but now she's very angry. Now she's upset at him, right? That's it. In other words, being jealous is when you're jealous not of the idol, but of the people who are worshiping that which is, look, you're replacing me with that lowly thing. Now I'm upset.
You're cheating.
I'm Hashem. You're cheating, right? So you're worshiping this lowly piece of wood instead of a real Hashem. So therefore, I'm angry at the at the people. Okay, Amar Lei. So the Zunin. So a certain Jewish fellow named Zunin said to Rabbi Akiva, "Libi v'libcha yoda davos kachavim leis b'mashasha." You know, both you and me, we know that Avodah Zara there's nothing to it, right? We do understand that. Vel kachazinan gavri de'ozli ki misabri. But how do you explain the fact that we see that people go to the churches and they come out healed, right? You see these revivals, right? That people come and the guy goes, pushes on the head and he falls, I'm healed, right? You see these things that are on TV, right? So how does it work? The asu ki matzmidi, and they come back and they're all healed. My time, but what's the reason why that happens? So Amar Lo, so he says, I'll tell you exactly how this works. Let's say there's a trustworthy fellow in a city. And everybody used to loan him money. They trusted him. So they didn't bring any proof. They didn't bring any witnesses when they used to deposit their money in the bank, right? It's a bank. So nobody brings a witness and signs the thing. The guy, the teller, writes it down and we trust it, right? We trust it. Some guy shows up, right? Some guy shows up to the bank and makes a deposit, and he brings two witnesses, and he makes the teller sign a document, right? So it's a little insulting. Everybody else trusts me, but this one guy doesn't. He signs it. One time, shachach, he forgot. He shows up to the bank and he forgot his witnesses. You know what? He made the deposit anyway, without witnesses. Of course, who's going to get upset? His wife gets upset, right? His wife says, okay, this is a problem here. Bo v'nach perenu, let's pretend he never made the deposit, right? He always comes with witnesses, so now we could just deny he ever came. In fact, it would be proof, because the fact is, we would say, if it was really true that he made the deposit, then where are the witnesses he always comes with? So Amar Law, so he said to her, what? Just because this guy is a fool and he doesn't do things properly, we're going to destroy our trustworthiness in the city over it? We're not going to do that. We're going to be the bigger people, take the high road on this. So too, that's the way Hashem treats plagues or afflictions that are upon people. Right? When a person has a plague or an affliction, so then Hashem tells the plague, right? When the plague gets sent on a person, Hashem says, you're sworn, as though the plague swears, the affliction swears, you're going to be sick. You're getting the flu for 3 days. That's it. You're getting the flu for 3 days. You're going to have a knee ache for 6 months.
Or for example, the Makkos B'choros, for example.
I don't think Makas, because the person wind up dead in Makas B'choros. So we're gonna pick an affliction that gets healed.
Right?
So we got to be able to make sure the person walks away at the end. Lice. Okay. Well, so for example, that's a fair, right? Hashem says there's gonna be lice on Egypt for a certain amount of time. That's the way afflictions work. V'lo teitzu el b'yom ploni. You shouldn't leave until such and such a date. Ubesha plonis, at such and such a time, valide ploni, right? And through such and such a person, valide sam ploni, with such and such a medicine. Kevan shegias manon latzeis. Now, the time comes for the plague to be over. Happens to be that guy showed up at the church one time, right? As they say, a broken clock is right twice a day. Certain time comes out, right? You've got a revival and 20,000 people are coming and they're getting their heads smacked. 4 guys get healed, right? That they were supposed to get. They were going to get healed whether they were shown up or not. Amru Yisurin din hu shalonetze. So the affliction says, you know what? We don't want to prove the avodas are right. We should have specifically not leave. Right? We should prove not wait till tomorrow when they're not at the church. The chosrin ve'omrin, but they go back and they say just because this guy does the wrong thing, like the guy said, right? Just because this guy's doing the wrong thing, anu nevad shvosenu, we're going to break our promise to Hashem. V'hainu dam Rabbi Yochanan says, my the pasuk says, v'cholim roim v'ne'amanim. These are these terrible afflictions, but they are trustworthy afflictions. What does that mean? They're affliction. Royim b'shlichusan, they're wicked in the way that they attack the person. V'ne'amanim b'shvuasan, but they follow the rules. right? So if it comes time to be saved and the affliction saved, they will leave regardless of what else the person is doing. So if this person is taking all of his medicine and he's praying to Avodah Zara, to idol worship, he can still be healed because the medicine's supposed to work, right? So therefore, even though one might make the presumption that the praying to their idol had something to do with it, it doesn't. Amarli Rava Bar Yitzchak. This is as we've had our conversations about the value of the Avodah Zarah, whether it has power or whether they don't have power. This Gemara seems to make very clear that the Avodah Zarah has nothing to it. Right? It's just coincidental if anything occurs. If there's a fire in the city and it lives, or if it's they get saved, or whatever. It's not because that is what's deserving. Amarle Rava Bar Yitzchak Rav Yehuda. So Rav Bar Yitzchak says to Rav Yehuda, Ha'ika beis avodas kochavim be'asrein dechi mitzarich alma lematra mischazi lehu bechalma. There's a certain, now this part of the Gemara seems to imply sort of the other way. There's an Avodah Zara in our city that when the world needs rain, then everybody sees in a dream v'amar lehu, and they say shachtu li gavra, bring a human sacrifice. Sounds like an Aztec sort of a thing, right? We need rain, so we need everybody, they have a dream. Everybody in the city who worships this idol has a dream, and they say, bring a human sacrifice, v'aisi matra, and now we're going to get rain. Shachtu lo gavra, and they bring the human sacrifice, v'aisi matra, and the rain comes. So how do you explain that? So Amarle Hashta Ihavi Shechivna Lo Amri Lehu Hamilsa. He says, if I would have died and I wouldn't have been able to tell you this teaching, that would have been a shame. Damar Rav says, My Dichsiv, what does the pasuk mean when it says Asher Chalak Hashem Lakecha Osam Lechol Ha'amim, that Hashem distributed this to all of the nations? Melamed Shechlikan Bidvar, Hashem made them slip. Lachalak means slipperiness. Hashem lets them slip. That if you're going to be so interested in worshiping idols, God gives you enough rope to hang yourself. Yeah.
Maybe it was a cloudy day. So when
it says that it works. Reish Lakish says, "My dichsev." What does it mean when the pasuk says, "Im leitzim hu yalitz"? That if you are scoffers, Hashem will help you be a scoffer. La'novim yitein, and those that are modest or humble, He will give kindness. Ba l'tamei poschin lo. That means that if a person wants to do the wrong thing, Hashem will allow you the opportunity to see things the wrong way. That's what free choice is all about. Hashem will give you the opportunity to see the things the wrong way. Ba l'taher. But if you're going to do the right things, Messiah also Hashem will help you to do the right things, which means that also there's a couple of notes here, right? That number one, these people were allowed to have whatever, I guess they were thinking in their dreams that this was supposed to work and whatever. Hashem allowed it to work for whatever reason. But then Hashem also helps to people to do the right things. So even if you are not capable or don't have the power on your own to do the right things, Hashem will help you. All you got to do is get started and Hashem will do the rest. So this last part of the Gemara seems to imply that there is something to some of the Avodah Zarah, that Hashem gives some sort of power or authority to some of the Avodah Zarah in order to allow people to have free choice. Otherwise, if everybody saw that they didn't do anything, then everybody would believe in God, and there would be no reward for believing in God.
Hashem wants us to succeed, basically, whether we're doing the right thing or
correct. We're going to succeed in whatever path we choose. Right. That is correct. Hashem is going to allow us to mess up. That's exactly right. Says the next Mishnah. Lokhin gas beuta mina ove kochavim afa pishu noto biyado v'nosein letapuach. Right. If somebody has the trough of a wine press, I'm going to just draw my impression of an olive press based on this Gemara, of a wine press based on this Gemara, which I'm sure doesn't exactly have to look this way. They had a basin up here. Right? This is our basin. And in this basin, you put a bunch of grapes. And then they would stamp on the grapes, smash all the grapes up here. Then they would have a little, like a hole here, which would lead to some kind of a ramp like this, right? And the juice would flow out of here. They would put a basket on the end here, and that is like a strainer, so that all of the sediment doesn't go down into this pit, this here, which they call a cistern, which catches all of the wine. Then the wine would sit in this cistern, and eventually all the skins and would settle either on the bottom or float up to the top. They call the stuff that floats up to the top scum. I don't think that's actually just like, that's where the word scum actually comes from. And that gets skimmed off the top. They then empty into barrels. The barrels then further settle, and they skim off the top of the scum a second time. But that's the wine making process. Okay. So in our Mishnah, right, this is we are talking about you can purchase, right, the wine press from a non-Jew with the grapes inside of it. And remember, the issue that we have is that a non-Jew that touches wine, right, is going to make the wine prohibited. Okay,
before it gets boiled.
Before it gets boiled, and so this is grape juice whether grape juice is considered wine. We're going to discuss at what point it is considered to be wine enough that it becomes prohibited.
If it's also needs to be boiled, otherwise it's being as well.
Yes, so if it's smashed in this container, in the upper container, so then that's not a problem. So you can buy the juice. You can buy this section from the idol worshiper and not worry that he has consecrated it as a libation for his idols. Right? Even though even though he's sticking his hands in it and he's mushing up all of the sediment and piling it up, that is not a problem. Vein osa yayin nesech, it doesn't become yayin nesech ad sheyered lebor until it comes down into the pit. And here it's yayin nesech. Yared lebor, if it goes down into the pit, babor aser, vashar mutter, whatever's in the pit becomes prohibited, and the rest is permitted. Okay.
So, for example, can you have non-Jews work in the first pit, but as long as you're
yes,
fine?
That is correct, right? So therefore, it goes into the pit. Whatever remains up here is still permitted. Whatever's down here is prohibited. Okay, that's how that works. Dorchin ima ove kochavim begas. Now we're on Daf Nun Ham Beis, right? 55b1, right? We are allowed to assist the non-Jew and stomp in if he has a non-Jewish non-Jew press. Now, we're going to learn that the rabbis made non-Jews rabbinically impure. Remember that we were very worried about becoming too friendly with non-Jews. And so therefore, in order to be able to make sure that Jews and non-Jews didn't eat together, they decided that all the non-Jews are going to be considered to have a level of impurity, which we're going to discuss in the Gemara coming up, a certain amount of impurity that comes to them.
For example, now, back in the time when Achashverosh and Esther, and they were eating together.
So we want to avoid that. So there's impurity. So now all of their utensils that they're squishing their grapes in are also impure. There is a prohibition, also a rabbinic prohibition, against making produce intentionally impure. Why? Because there were a group of people who had a stringency that they placed upon themselves that even those things that were not for the Beis Hamikdash or not Truma, they would eat them in a status of purity, right? Those were these extra careful people. They would eat their chulin in a state of purity. Therefore, in order to make sure that they had something to eat, Rabbanan established, people should make sure that all of their utensils are pure before they start making their produce and things. So now, this non-Jew, if you help him crush the grapes in his vat, are you not helping him make impure produce? And that should be a problem. There should be a prohibition. The answer is, if the non-Jew's already in there and he's already squishing his grapes, it's already impure. So therefore, if you get in there and he hires you to help him squish his grapes, right? It's like the I Love Lucy episode, right? They're all stomping on the grapes. Then it's still going to be prohibited. Yes?
Well, what if the non-Jew's only working there on the condition that someone's going to help them? Then you're helping.
So at this point, we're discussing that's actually the non-Jew's press. We're going to see other cases where the non-Jew comes to the Jew's press and he's hired in order to work. Then the halacha becomes different, right? We'll see. So, Yisrael shu ose betuma lo dorchin velo botzrin imo. If you have a Jewish person, now this is a Jewish person's press, and this person he's not careful about his impurity. This Jewish person is himself impure for whatever reason, and he's squishing the grapes. You cannot help him, right? Because now you're helping him make the item impure. Aval, however, molichin imo chavios legas. However, you're allowed to bring the barrels to the press, but you're allowed to take the wine away first. In other words, once the wine is already impure, then you're just carrying barrels, right? You didn't participate in the process of making the wine impure, then that's okay. It's only making it impure that's a problem. Then put a sticker on it and say, warning, this is impure, and carry it wherever you want to carry it. Similarly, nachtom, shu osa betuma. Now, nachtom has an argument between Rashi and Tosfos what this nachtom is. According to Rashi, the nachtom is the guy who's the baker who kneads the dough. And the palter is the fellow who bakes the dough. Tosfos does not like that. He says nachtom is the guy who kneads and bakes the dough. The palter is the reseller. So either one.
Like the baker, basically.
Nachtom is the baker, right? Nachtom shu osa betuma. If you have a baker who makes his bread betuma, again, against the wishes of the rabbis. Lo loshin velo urchinimo. You're not allowed to help him. You can't be the assistant baker in his shop and help him do that. Aval molichinimo pas lepalter. But you can then take it over to the palter, whether that means you could take it to the baker or you could take it over to the reseller once it's already baked. So that's that's permissible because once it's already done, it's too late. It's done. Now let's discuss this. Amar says the Gemara. Amar Rav Huna. Rav Huna says yayin. When it comes to wine, kaven shehischil lehamshech osa yayin nesach. Once it starts to flow, it becomes yayin nesach. Now that sound does not sound like our Mishnah. As our Mishnah sounded like it had to get through the wine press, come down the chute, get strained, and be in the cistern. And now Rav Huna is suggesting that even while it's flowing inside of the upper urn, separated, once the grape juice is flowing around in there, that already is enough for the non-Jew to be able to consecrate it and make it prohibited. So Tanan, Bar Mishnah says, Lochen gasp uta min ha'ove kochavim. You're allowed to take this stomped wine press from the non-Jew. Even though he's sticking his hands in it and he's putting the sediment and the skins into a pile in there and he's separating it out. So now you've got flowing, right? He's trying to make sure that the drain is clear so that he can scoop it away. Now you've got puddles of grape juice in there. That's, according to the Mishnah, is fine. Amar Rav Huna, so Rav Huna says, Begas pekuka umaleya. That's when we're talking about a plugged up, where the drain is plugged up, and the vat is completely full. That way, there's nothing flowing. There's nothing moving around in that vat, and it's completely, there's no way for that grape juice to be really separated from the skins and the sediment. That's what the Mishnah is talking about. So otherwise, in a normal circumstance, the skins and the grape juice can become separated, and then the wine could become, according to Rav Huna. But in this circumstance, if it's completely filled up and it's plugged up, then nothing is going to be slopping around. There's no space for it to move around in. Everything remains mushed together, and that's why that's what our Mishnah is talking about. Toshma, but come and listen. Ve'eno osa yayin nesech. It doesn't become yayin nesech ad shiyari labor, says the next part of the Mishnah, until it gets down to the pit. So hachinami begas pekuka umaleya. He says, you're right. Again, same idea. That's because you've got the upper chamber is already plugged off. Therefore, only anything that runs down. Toshma, we'll try again. Yorad lebor, if it comes down, if the wine comes down to the pit, mashibabor also, whatever comes down to the pit is prohibited. Ve'ashar mutter, and everything else is permitted. So Amar Rav Huna says, okay, you got me, right? If you're going to tell me everything else is permitted and it's coming down the chute already, lo kasha, but it's not a contradiction. Kan b'mishnah rishona, kan b'mishnah achrona. They changed it. They had an original rule of what the halacha was. They wrote our Mishnah, which was according to the original understanding of the rule. And then afterwards, they came back and they adjusted it. And they said, no, the non-Jews are still sanctifying it inside the upper chamber. And therefore, the rule got changed to this Titania. And I'll show you a brisa which proves that. But Rishona, at first, Hayu Omrim, they used to say the halacha was badad. That means the following three rules. Number one, ein botzrin im ha'oved kochavim begas. Right? You're not allowed to trample with a non-Jew in the press itself. She'aser ligrom tuma l'chulin, because by doing so, you are making you're making the grapes that are there, helping him make them tamei. So that's going to be issue number one. You cannot do that. Sheba Eretz Yisrael l'chulin sheba Eretz Yisrael, which is in Eretz Yisrael, which we said was the halacha. The ein dorchen im Yisrael she'osa perusa betuma. Number two, you're not allowed to trample together with the Jew who's making his fruits in a state of tumah. Can't do that either, because he's also making his produce into something which is prohibited. Because you can't help somebody who's doing an avera. Right? He's doing the avera, he's trampling, can't help him. Aval, however, dorchim im ha'oved kochavim begas. However, you're allowed to trample with a non-Jew in his wine press, V'lo chayshinan lid Rav Huna. We don't have to worry about Rav Huna's rule. Rav Huna's rule that says that it can still become wine inside the upper basin. V'chazru lomar, but then they changed their mind and they reset and they said dabad. The prohibitions are these three things. Ein dorchim min avodah k'chavim begas. You're not allowed to have a non-Jew who's going to be trampling in the upper chamber. Mishum de Rav Huna, in the name of Rav, because of what Rav Huna said, that it becomes prohibited immediately. Now, your question was, can he be hired and can the non-Jew trample? So we're running low on time, but we probably will pick this up this evening, and we will find the halacha this evening that when there's a non-Jew who we have reason to believe that he's doing some other action other than something like consecrating his wine, we can trust that he is not doing that. We'll see the circumstances for that. We also will make a distinction for the non-Jew if he's using his feet versus using his hands, because he will only consecrate using his hands, not his feet. So therefore, if he's stomping, we will have the circumstance where they give an example. In order to do something, for example, they would have the non-Jew said, put on a pair of handcuffs, hold your hands, right? Keep them tied. You can't touch any of the wine. Now trample, right? The non-Jew could do that, not an issue. Now in the non-Jew's wine press, it would still be an issue because it could be impure, right? Then we'll have a purity problem. But if you're not dealing with a purity issue, we'll get to that this evening. Then as long as the non-Jew could wear some kind of gloves or something, right? He could just wear gloves in order to be able to keep him from touching the wine, then he would be fine, right? Modern era, we can have a non-Jew using the machinery, for example, right? It wouldn't be
you turns it on, basically.
correct. Then it would be not the issue. Now, just to finish up to the two dots, vein boats are in Im Yisrael also perusa batuma. You're not allowed to squeeze with a Jewish person who is making his produce in Tuma, as we said that you're helping him cause Tuma in Eretz Yisrael, which we have to avoid. And v'chein, v'kol shekein she'in dorchin, and so for sure, right, you can't trample in his press. Aval, however, botzrin im ha'ovi kochav begas, but you're allowed to trample the wine with a non-Jew in his wine press. Why? Because they changed their rule and they said that when you have produce grown by a non-Jew, it's not obligated in truma anyway, and so therefore, since it's not going to become truma anyway, there's no obligation to keep this produce in a state of tahara. They only said a Jew's produce, that you have to worry about tuma. A Jew's produce will eventually have truma separated off from it, and now you have future produce that is going to become truma prohibited and tameh already. But the non-Jew, since he grows it himself, he's not obligated to take tithes off of it. So if he's not obligated to take tithes off it, there's no need for it to be tahor. And they rescinded the general rule, which said that all produce has to be kept pure. And they changed basic bottom line. As Rav Huna's point is, they changed the rules somewhat. They changed the rules. And they said that we do have to worry about the wine that's in the upper vat. We don't have to worry about it remaining tahor. We'll stop here at the two dots.